Hello again. So, day 2. And I've called today looking into the eyes of Jesus. And today we begin our journey through Colossians 1, verses 15 to 20, as have been read to us this morning. I asked yesterday what may be one of your favourite hymns or songs that describe who Jesus is. Suggested maybe "To God be the glory" or "In Christ alone," but maybe you've thought of many others since then. And that's because, as I said, these verses could be a hymn that was already in existence. Whether this is the case or not doesn't really matter, because this is a powerful confession of faith. And today we start at the very beginning of it. We're starting with verse 15. And here's 3 possible translations of this verse. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He is the divine portrait, the true likeness of the invisible God, and the firstborn heir of all creation. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. So we have here, Christ is the image, a divine portrait, a true likeness of God who we cannot see. Wow, what a gift has been given to us, to see God through Jesus. But first let's consider what comes to mind when we think of image, likeness or portrait. How do you feel about your image? Do you like looking in the mirror? Do you like doing this kind of thing, being recorded? I don't think many of us do actually, do we? My husband's a keen photographer, so over the years I have got very used to just ignoring the fact that he's taking photographs of me. Sometimes I delete them, as you would imagine. Do you like going to art galleries and looking at portraits? Wouldn't say I'm a great fan, but I did go to the National Portrait Gallery in London a few years ago, and I found it utterly fascinating. The diversity of the styles of painting was huge. There have been many portraits of famous people over the years, haven't there? And it's reported that the last painting of Winston Churchill, he disliked it so much that he destroyed it. Creating someone's image is an odd thing, isn't it? It only ever captures a point in time, and it is static. In addition, in regard to ourselves, we have a perception of how we look or how we wish to be represented. And when we see a photo or a picture, it doesn't fit our image, does it, of who we are or perhaps how we wish to be seen? I look very like my mother. I should celebrate that fact, but sometimes I find it difficult. Well, we heard about Winston Churchill's reaction. I don't think my reaction is quite that strong. But artists over the years, and still today, are engaged in portraiture. And I found some interesting comments about this process. Firstly, from Charles Baudelaire. Nothing in a portrait is a matter of indifference. Gesture, grimace, clothing, decor even, all must combine to realise a character. So he's asking us to look beneath the surface. Take a look at these images. A young boy or girl looking wistfully into the distance, holding a battered book. What's in the book? An Indian or Oriental lady lounging on a Western couch. Why? A First World War infantryman, ready to go to war, or just back from the war. What do these portraits say to us? What questions do they make you ask? We will also view these differently according to our perspective and experience. Therefore, there is so much more than the features on a face, isn't there? Any artist will choose the clothing, the background, other elements of the picture that represent the person's life. The portrait actually tells us a story. It's most definitely not a flat image, and perhaps this is where it differs so much from the average holiday photo on the beach. Here's a second quote then. Get yourself a mirror and paint your own portrait, over and over. It's a great chance to experiment. You'll discover things about yourself and you don't have to pay the model. Well, there's a thought. So this is another aspect, isn't it? The depth that is revealed when we look at ourselves and deeply consider our image. A scary thing for most of us to do, I believe. Are we prepared for the revelation of deeply gazing at ourselves and seeing our innermost being? I suspect not. Why do I talk about this then? Well, going back to our passage, which is rendered either as the Son is the image of the invisible God, or Christ is the visible image of the invisible God, or he is the divine portrait, the true likeness of the invisible God. Here we have language that is trying to say to us, if you want to know what God looks like, look at Jesus. But what we have here is so much more, isn't it, than a mere human portrait that I've been talking about, or a fleeting photograph. This is the image, the likeness, portrait of God himself, found here in Jesus, who left the very throne room of heaven to come in human form. God became flesh, as we read in John 1, taking on the very likeness of a man, as Paul writes in Philippians. It's like Paul is trying to say to us here in Colossians, whatever image you hold of God in your mind, or how he looks, forget all that. Forget all that you think you know, and look at Jesus, who is the image of God. Well, this may sound very obvious to you, but I wonder whether we slip by this profound reality because it's become too familiar. Let's pause for a moment and consider then our current image of God. Well, how do we view God? Have we mistakenly taken a snapshot of God and think we have an image of all that he is? Have we frozen him in a point in time in our lives? Have we mistakenly painted our own self-portrait of God based on our image of ourselves or someone we know and decided that is God? Have we crafted a likeness which fits with history and experience and what others have said and decided that is God? So, who really is God then? First, let's take a bit of a journey back to the Old Testament for a moment and the time when Moses dared to argue with God in Exodus 33, pleading to see his face. And you may like to read this whole chapter at another point. Moses says to God in his argument, "Now show me your face." God says, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." God does give a concession to Moses and he tells him to stand in the cleft of the rock and he will shield him as he passes by so that Moses only sees his back. God goes on to give Moses the tablets of the law for the second time. And when Moses comes back down the mountain, his face is so radiant the people can't look at him. He's radiant because he's been in the presence of God. Not even because he's seen the face of God. God just passed by. Wow. This gives us an image of a holy, awesome, powerful God who perhaps is out of reach and concealed from us. And as the Israelites go on with their relationship with Yahweh, there are strict rules about who can enter the Holy of Holies, and it was a potentially dangerous activity. This God is remote, and a God before whom we have to make ourselves acceptable. This is a God who only reveals himself to the chosen few, or perhaps the so-called holy ones. Well, perhaps we don't want to hold on to these images. And you would say, well, I've moved on because I've read the New Testament and I know Jesus. But it is surprising how much we can hold on to the images which we have imbibed. Do you hold an image of God that is remote or authoritarian, perhaps? Or for you, is God really high up and exalted, seated on a throne, too remote for you and your life? Is your image of God where, well, you wouldn't bother him with really important, unless it's a really important thing? Well, this verse in Colossians says quite clearly that Jesus is the image, the likeness, the portrait of the hidden God, the God whom Moses could not look upon. He is now revealed in his fullness in Jesus. Well, let's consider our image of Jesus then. That should clear it up. Well, actually, it adds a further challenge, doesn't it? Because what's our image of Jesus? For Paul's readers in AD 60, some may have actually met Jesus, or at least they were talking with people who had. However, we've not seen Jesus face to face either. So how does it help us that Jesus is the image of God if we haven't seen him either? Obviously, the answer is in the Gospels, and all that's recorded there tells us who Jesus is. But hang on again. I think we may have already created our own image of Jesus, don't you? You know, the image that comes from Sunday school stories, paintings of Jesus with flowing blonde hair and white robes and gleaming sandals, those Renaissance pictures. Or maybe Jesus is like Robert Powell in that old movie of Jesus of Nazareth with the piercing blue eyes and not really displaying much emotion. Or your Jesus may be one who just suffers silently and calmly and with dignity. Who is your Jesus then? You see, Jesus was a Middle Eastern man, and we can read in one of the prophecies in Isaiah that there would be nothing to recommend him to us as a man. It says in Isaiah 53, he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. So we rather presume that he didn't have Hollywood looks then. Maybe he could have easily passed through a crowd unnoticed. If his portrait had been painted, it may have been swarthy, dark, grubby from travelling on the road. Not a beautiful Greek Adonis for sure. Alternatively, your image of Jesus may be from early children's songs, a Jesus who is meek and mild and no crying he made, as the Christmas Carol puts it. However, if we read the Gospels once again, we find a man who acted controversially, who constantly questioned the status quo, who was unorthodox, dramatic, got dirty, and delivered radical teaching. That doesn't fit with my Christmas Carol. Jesus was kind, compassionate, endlessly loving and forgiving, full of both gentleness and strength, but also a man of justice and honour, who did become angry and challenge authority. He was this and so many more things too. So who is your Jesus? In order to truly absorb this phrase that Jesus is the image of the invisible God and what it means for us, we have to both shift our latent image of who God is, take him from his distant remote place or his throne seated on high where we've put him, and really grasp what it meant for him to present himself, give himself to us in human form, in Jesus. Then, having made that leap, we have to adjust our deeply held views and images of Jesus in order that when we read this verse, we are viewing it with a clearer lens, for our lenses will never be perfect, but they can be clearer. I wonder, do you wear glasses? So many of us do. How annoying it is when your glasses get a smudge on them, don't you find? Or with this mask wearing, they just steam up the whole time. And you have to clean them or take them off to allow the condensation to go because you can't see clearly. The lens through which we look at Jesus can be a bit like that, and perhaps we need to clear away some of our smudges and fogs that we've acquired over the years. This is all potentially hard work, for very often we don't realise the images that we are carrying around in the background about God and Jesus. They come from upbringing, church experience, RE lessons, Sunday school, media impact, and so many places that aren't the Gospels. So what do we do then? Well, I entitled this talk, Looking into the Eyes of Jesus. Jesus, through the power of the Holy Spirit, is the only one who can truly reveal himself to us. When we genuinely stand before him and say, like Moses said to God, "Show me who you are, Jesus. Show me who you are. Let me see your face." And whereas God said no to Moses because he might die, Jesus will always say yes to us. He wants to reveal himself to us. I think this takes great courage. It took Moses great courage to argue with God. Are you up for it? I recall a story in the Gospel of John of the woman at the well who entered into conversation with Jesus when he asked her for a drink. I believe he looked directly into her eyes and she into his. And he knew the truth about her and her life, and he loved her. He knew and he understood. He trusted her with the truth of who he was, which was something he didn't do with many people at all. She in turn had to have courage to look into his eyes, and she knew he was the one who could enable her to drink from the well that never ran dry, that living water. And so she ran to her village and proclaimed that she had met this man who told her all that ever was. Could he be the Messiah? She spread the good news of Jesus across Samaria. That's what can happen when you look into the eyes of Jesus. When you choose to look at his image and then see the image of God. If we want Jesus to be the portrait, likeness, image of the living God, we need to look deeply into Jesus' eyes, to go beyond what we think we know on the surface, to understand and believe who he really is and how he longs to reveal himself to us. Then we will begin to grasp who the living God is. So a few thoughts to leave you with then. Read one of the Gospels cover to cover as a book. Mark is the shortest. John is quite different. Luke and Matthew, some have Christmas, they both have the Christmas story in them. Take your pick, but read one of them. And as you read them, pray, Jesus, show me who you are. In a prayer time, take time to sit in God's presence and ask to look into the eyes of Jesus. He will not hide from you or conceal himself as God had to with Moses. If you want to understand more of the Middle Eastern man Jesus, read Philip Yancey's book, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes. It's quite revealing. But I pray that you will have a fresh encounter with the image of the invisible God. That is his Son, Jesus Christ.